evolution of mankind, there are three stages of consciousness. First, man lives in paradise, among the gods. Man is unconsciously omniscient, because his mind is not yet separated from the cosmic mind. It is as though it were asleep. In the second stage, the soul enters the cycles of necessity, as we call it in Theosophy, and mankind descends into the material world and develops consciousness. Thirdly, for us still in the future, when man will have completed his journey, he will be omniscient again, but now consciously. He will be among the gods again, as in the first stage, but now as a cooperator, fully awake. In the second stage, in which we are now, we found ourselves on our own, and we have to develop our own individual minds and learn to experience reality as it is divided into subject and object. A long road through the opposites now starts, where thinking in dualities is developed. It is not only the body which falls into matter, but also the mind. As Blavatsky puts it in The Secret Doctrine, Volume 1, in the chapter Spirit Falling into Matter, the three middle principles in man become with every step more material, the soul stepping back to make room for physical intellect. In Western European culture, which is the fifth stage in the post-Atlantean era, starting with the Greeks, or the fruit of the fourth stage, fourth subrace, we can see in history the following. Looking at man's spiritual and mental life, we first find mythology. The origin of the world is experienced as follows. First, there was chaos, which was boundless space, without measure, beginning or end. Out of this vast void originated Gaia, Earth. Gaia brought forth the boundless sea and infinite heaven, Pontos and Uranus. They had offspring, but Uranus felt his dominance threatened and killed many of his offspring. Of the remaining, only Kronos was brave enough to avenge this gruesome act. Kronos maimed Uranus and took over power, but in his turn he was overthrown by Zeus. This can be interpreted as follows. Eternity, Uranus, was followed by time, Kronos, Saturn, and time was followed by space, Zeus, Jupiter. So it was seen by man who was still in touch with the creative powers as he was about to enter the second stage. Then philosophy emerged in ancient Greece. Man starts bringing about his own thinking, and he moves from the mythological to the logical. After Greek culture, science emerged as an outcome of Greek philosophy, being man's own contribution during the second stage, the work of physical intellect in the physical world, man's descent into matter and space. How this transition took off is nicely depicted by the Renaissance artist, painter Raphael in the Vatican fresco The School of Athens, where in the center Plato and Aristotle are shown in a pose typical for their philosophical approach. Plato pointing upwards to eternity, the world of ideas, the first stage where we come from, so as not to forget our origin in the other world, and Aristotle, seen as the father of science, stretching his hand out forward with the palm down, as if saying, time has come for the mind to turn its attention to this world, existing in space and matter. With his physical intellect, as Blavatsky puts it in the previously quoted statement. In Roman times, Christian philosophy developed along Platonic lines, and this was carried on in Western Europe all through the Middle Ages. In the Arabic world, however, Aristotle's philosophy was eagerly absorbed, and through contact with this culture in the late Middle Ages, Western Europe discovered Aristotle and learned about the scientific discoveries that were made in this Arabic part of the world. This triggered philosophy to free herself from theology, to which it had been the servant in the previous centuries. But about 4 centuries later, Aristotle himself would be rejected again, and the emancipation of physics from philosophy came about. I assume you all know the names of Francis Bacon, Galileo, Descartes, and Newton. The Western mind descended deeper into matter and started employing mathematics as a tool in the development of physics. So the quantitative approach became more important than the regard for the qualitative, and the trinity number, measure, weight became the ruling principle as a triangle pointing downwards, whereas the upward pointed triangle, the qualitative or ethical triangle, goodness, truth, beauty, of the Platonic tradition, played no part in physics anymore. Separation of subject and object was necessary in science, not the union of them, like the spiritual life requires. In the 17th century, empirical science took great strides forward. The scientific method was developed with its rules to arrive at the unquestionable laws of the physical world through experimentation and verification. The Western mind was now firmly anchored to the material world by the dominance of science. Philosophy and religion played a secondary part. The danger of this road was, of course, that in man's perception, matter would become so powerful that spirit would be forgotten. And in the course of the 19th century, spirit was by many thought to be a mere product of matter. And to this day, this strange idea is still predominant in many of the scientifically oriented circles. As Theosophists, we know that it was precisely to counterpoint this danger that in 1875 the Theosophical Society was established. In the 20th century, we saw what could be a turning point in science with the emergence of the theory of relativity and quantum physics. But can this mean science is entering the spiritual realm? Well, at least it does show that Western mind is knocking at heaven's door. Physics is still confined to the physical and mental planes, and has not yet discovered the ethereal and astral planes as such. But for biologists like Rupert Sheldrake, who look for causes in life, not just in matter. As for philosophy, the Western mind is gradually approaching the Buddhic plane. Now, has this turning upward to the third stage already reached a degree so that we can say that we have definitely entered the path to the third stage? I think not, and I don't want to speculate in centuries as to when this will occur, although Theosophy does provide some insight into this but going into this now would move us too far from our subject and take too much time. Has science then contributed anything to spirituality? Not directly, I think, but I do assume that the spiritually inclined can learn something from the scientists. For among the esotericists, we see a tendency to speculate rather carelessly, to arrive at only those conclusions that confirm their already accepted opinions, so their philosophies satisfy their egos instead of looking for the truth unconditionally and selflessly. In my opinion, esotericism could benefit a lot by heeding the so-called scientific method, although moving in opposite direction. So not by relying on perception by the senses, experimentation and observation of one's own reasoning, but by gaining insight from the practicing of minute observation of one's own reasoning, clear logical and truthful thinking, by patience, deduction and induction, repeatedly testing the outcome of the thinking as the scientific method demands, could esotericism benefit. A lot of useless byways would thus be avoided. I'd like to end with a metaphor given to us in the fairy tale of Hansel and Gretel, a small esoteric masterpiece like many fairy tales. When Hansel and Gretel, the monad, have to leave their father's house, they could first find their way back with help of the opaque white pebbles, which Hansel had put into his pocket before leaving their father's house, meaning the purely spiritual ideas. But the second attempt to find the way back with the breadcrumbs, meaning the man-made thoughts, was not successful. So the monad, Atma Buddhi, Hansel Gretel, had to move on, deeper into the woods. You all know the part with the edible cottage and the witch, so I will skip that, though it also has a number of esoteric meanings, of course. When they had killed the witch, they found precious faceted gemstones in the cottage, some even translucent, allowing light to pass through them. Contrary to the beginning of the story, when the naturally formed pebbles, the ideas from their father's house, could only take them backwards, now, however, the children took and carried home these faceted gemstones, thoughts and ideas created out of their many experiences and suffering during their exile, their second stage. They brought them back as a gift to their father's house, science and philosophy. Thank you.